Like I said, Brandon Dawson. I am really excited to start session two of our Energy Affordability Strategy Series with you all today. We have a number of great speakers who range from polling to organizing to research and to advocacy, and really want to share as many perspectives as we can as possible on this key issue, which is about utility accountability and reform. Again, before we jump in, please feel free to drop your name, organization, and state in the chat so we can see who's in the room, have a sense of community, make sure you know who you're talking to and who's not talking or whatnot. Um, uh, a quick grounding, especially for anyone new, Just Solutions works with state environmental and climate justice coalitions to advance policy that lead to healthier, more resilient communities and more accountable systems. We specifically do that by supporting partners through convening states to share strategy and replicate models, providing tailored research, policy analysis, and support, and offering spaces like this to strengthen how strategy can really translate into campaign decisions and outcomes for our communities. We work on a number of issues. Energy affordability is just one of them. So please feel free to reach out to any of the staff in the space today, and we are more than happy to schedule a conversation about how we can support you in your work you're doing. We really are excited about being in as many states as possible and is working as many communities and groups as possible, including those that we're already working in. And so if you're in one of those states that you find on our website, please feel free to feel free to contact us via email, which will be at the end of the presentation, as well as just through the chat, and we'll be sure to monitor that. Next slide, please. So today, this is the second session in our affordability series. In our first session, we focused mostly on household protections. So what stabilizes households and reduces exposure to crisis. Today, we're shifting one level upstream and talking about systems and decisions that shape affordability in the first place, specifically how utility regulation, planning, and investment decisions are driving up energy costs around the country. To focus today will be about how utilities make decisions around infrastructure and spending, how those decisions translate into rates and affordability outcomes, and lastly, where advocates can intervene to actually engage in the process and what your influence could shape with regard to outcomes. This is a very nascent topic, as I'm sure everyone is very aware. There are a number of campaigns happening across the country related to utility affordability, and we're so excited to lend our service in terms of support for around research and policy to really inform the work that you all are doing on the ground. We have a number of great speakers, as I mentioned, who are going to be able to kind of give you some key insights into the work that they're doing, but also how that can be used for your campaigns. And so next slide, please. First, we'll hear from Crystal Bernard, one of our state strategists, who will talk a little bit about why utility reform and accountability is a key measure or key strategy on affordability. Next, we'll hear from David Gold and Leah Zemeznik, who will talk about a little bit about polling and the public opinion on utility accountability. Then we'll get a national advocacy perspective from People's Action, Vicki Kaplan, one of our key partners, who I'm really excited to hear from today. They just recently launched a really cool campaign that they would love for folks to be a part of. And next, we'll hear from one of our state advocates and a partner in Oregon Just Transition Alliance, Ana Molina. Really excited to hear from her. Lastly, we'll hear from our Research and Policy Director, Elena Krieger, on where utility accountability decisions are occurring, and then we'll go into a short Q&A. Don't be shy about Q&A. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat. I'll be tracking them throughout, as well as using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom interface. Then we'll go into regional breakouts. Those are spaces where we'll really dive into what's happening, who's doing what, and how you can share information across states on those. With that, I will pass it over to Crystal Bernard to take it over.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brandon. Like Brandon said, I'm Crystal Bernard. I'm the state strategist here at Just Solutions, and I'm based out of Detroit. So thanks again for joining us. This is the second part of our Energy Affordability Strategy Series. In the first session, we focused on household protections and what happens once bills are already high and hitting households. Today, we want to shift upstream and look at utility reform and accountability, and specifically how regulatory, legislative, and other activities influence energy costs, and really set the stage for why this matters, although we're aware most of us in this room understand that in our different ways. But when we talk about affordability, we're not just looking at high energy bills, but also how those bills are shaped by decisions such as how much utilities spend, where they invest, how electricity prices are set. and who are overseeing those decisions. So utility reform is certainly not separate from affordability. However, it's one of the main ways affordability can be produced or constrained when we're talking about electricity. So we really hope that this session provides an understanding of where some of these important decisions are made and where might there be opportunities to influence them. So with that framing, I would like to transition to David Gold and Leah with the Environmental Polling Consortium to really ground us in the public opinion on these ideas and how people are understanding this current rising energy costs and questions of accountability. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal and Brandon and the whole Just Solutions team. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I can just get a thumbs up from someone when that pops up. Awesome. So yes, thank you. My name is David Gold. I'm the director of the Environmental Polling Consortium, and we are a movement support organization that aggregates and analyzes public opinion for the environmental movement. To give you a little bit more intro on us. The Environmental Polling Consortium, or EPC, was created a number of years ago by some of the larger national environmental groups who realized that they were all kind of commissioning polling on a lot of the same topics. We're all interested in public opinion on some of the same topics. So wouldn't it be great if there was a hub for the environmental advocacy community to go and find that polling all in one place and make it more accessible to the community writ large? So that's the role we fill. We collect a lot of polling from uh, public sources as well as non-public polling from allied groups. We house it, we analyze trends, and we serve as a resource for anybody in the environmental movement who just wants to better understand where public opinion is and how to shift it. Again, we're a movement support organization, so almost all of the work that we do is of no cost to allied groups. My colleague Leah will share some more info in the chat about how you can access our resources. And when we looked at the existing polling on utilities and utility accountability for this webinar, there are a few key takeaways that stand out. So I wanted to highlight these before we get into the data. So first, the overwhelming majority of Americans say that they're worried about their utility bills. It's probably not surprising to folks, but what does stand out is how high utilities rank as a financial stressor for people right now, and also how universal that concern is. Maybe a year or so ago, we saw kind of more regional variation in people's concerns about utility bills, or maybe state by state. Now we see people in every part of the country saying that their bills are going up. The second key takeaway here is that utility companies are getting the most blame for the problem from the American people. So voters or US adults recognize that there are multiple factors behind recent increases in electricity prices, but they don't really understand how the cost of electricity is determined or how their rates are set. And the easiest scapegoat is their utility company because that's who they're paying every month. That's whose name is on the bill, right? The third point I want to highlight up top here was that there is a very, very strong desire for more accountability for the companies that voters see as increasing electricity prices. So that includes utility companies first and foremost, but also data centers. And what's really, really striking in the data is how strongly voters support policies to hold these companies accountable relative even to other policy solutions for energy affordability. So first getting into how voters view utility costs. So 84% of voters nationwide say that they're concerned about the cost of electricity. That includes 43% who are very concerned about the cost of electricity, so quite a bit of intensity here. This is from a poll by LCV and Climate Power in January. Home heating costs, a little bit less of a concern. 78% say that they're concerned about home heating costs, including 37% who are very concerned. And typically in polls that ask, what cost increases people are feeling or worried about, the cost of food and groceries is number one almost all the time. And then electricity and utilities in general are kind of in the next tier, usually somewhere around the same level of healthcare and housing. So after groceries, electricity and utilities have become one of those core cost concerns for voters over the past year or so. Now, across the country, 73% of voters say that their utility costs have gone up in the past year. And that includes large majorities, two-thirds or more, in every region of the country, the Northeast, South, Midwest, and West. There is some regional variation here. So the Northeast tends to stand out a bit in terms of electricity cost concerns. That is reflective of how high electricity bills have gotten in Northeast states in particular. But really, every region of the country is feeling this now. It's very much a universally felt problem. And it's important to note that people aren't just fed up with the costs. There's also a perceived lack of transparency and a lack of control over how much people pay for their utilities. So this is from a poll conducted about a year ago of U.S. adults nationwide, and they found that 80% of Americans say that they feel powerless in how much they're charged for electricity or gas services. Less than half, 42%, say that they understand what drives the cost that they're charged by the local electric or gas utilities. And also less than half, 38%, say that their state does a good job protecting their personal interests when it comes to regulating local electrical or gas utilities. So clear sense, even beyond just the cost stressor that, consumers don't have power over their utility bills. There's nothing they can do about them. The state isn't doing enough to regulate utility bills. And people are also just not getting a clear explanation of why their utility bills are going up. When you ask voters who or what they blame the most for electricity and home energy costs going up, number one in pretty much every poll is the utility companies. So this example, 75% of voters said that they blamed high costs on utility companies overcharging customers to increase their profits. 79% also said that they blamed state regulators for letting utility companies charge customers high prices. So again, frustration not just with the utility companies here, but also the lack of regulation by state governments. After utilities, there are a few other factors that majorities blame, at least somewhat, for rising utility costs. Those are things like rising prices for natural gas, increasing electricity demand from AI and data centers, and decisions by the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress to terminate solar power and wind energy projects. Last on the list of things people blame here is policies by Biden and Democrats in Congress to increase the use of clean energy instead of natural gas. That also is a consistent finding in polls. Clean energy or so-called clean energy mandates do not receive much blame for this problem. In many cases, people think that clean energy is cheaper than natural gas or other sources. They see clean energy as more of part of the solution than part of the problem. And we think this finding is really important because the scapegoating of clean energy is something that still gets repeated a lot. Trump does it, a lot of Republican campaigns are doing it, and the data pretty consistently shows that voters just aren't buying that argument that clean energy is to blame for rising costs. Couple of other findings about how people view utilities. So most people say they're familiar with their local power and or gas utilities. Only around half say that they're at least somewhat familiar with where their energy is sourced from, whether it's coal or gas or renewables or nuclear. And then less than half are familiar with the state or local regulatory agency that oversees their local power or gas utilities. Again, we saw that voters do pin a lot of blame on regulators, but they aren't quite sure who those regulators are or what those regulating bodies are. And then moving lastly into polling on policies and messaging. So this battery of policies, and there's a lot of data on the slide here. This comes from a survey by EDF Action in January of battleground states, so quite representative of the country overall. And they asked voters about a bunch of different potential policy solutions to help address utility costs. And they found that voters support pretty much any policies that they can get to help with this problem. There's majority support for all of the proposals that were tested here, including restoring tax credits for clean energy, as well as utilizing existing gas power plants so voters aren't feeling too picky about the source of their electricity right now. And then the three energy affordability policy solutions that have the greatest support here, with 80% of voters or more in favor, are upgrading the electric grid, requiring data centers to pay for their own electricity and infrastructure needs, and limiting the amount that utility companies can increase executive pay when they are raising rates for consumers. And if you look at the intensities, the percentage who strongly support each proposal, the two that have the most intensity here in terms of support by a fair margin are requiring data centers to pay for their own electricity and infrastructure and limiting the amount that utility companies can increase executive pay when they're raising rates. So even more than policies to increase the energy supply, voters strongly support those kind of corporate accountability measures. Again, that is the moment we are in. Voters feel very strongly that these companies are not getting regulated enough and need to be held accountable. And we tend to see that across partisan lines as well. A few specific accountability policies that people gravitate toward. This comes from qualitative research by the Utility Action Alliance last year. And they found that in these focus group discussions, three things that really popped for voters were, in terms of proposals, were banning political donations so that utilities can't make donations to the state legislators that have a say in regulating them. Also tying executive compensation to service, again, that executive pay piece. So utility executives, people want to be paid based on how well they can minimize rate increases and generate affordable electricity. And then the third kind of proposal that emerged is cracking down on rate hikes, specifically by not allowing multi-year rate increases and therefore requiring that utility companies explain and defend any rate increases every year. All of these policies strike voters as kind of very common sense policies to prevent conflicts of interest and protect consumers. And then lastly, the Utility Action Alliance also tested a series of persuasive messages in support of stronger utility accountability last year. And the top performing message that they tested by far, in terms of increasing support for utility accountability, was about executive pay. And that message reads, electric companies are charging record high rates and making record high profits, then giving multi-million-dollar bonuses to their executives, including one company that gave their CEO $33 million last year. Voters rated that message as about twice as persuasive as all the other messages in this poll. So again, that greed, that kind of corporate greed angle is very powerful when you're communicating about utility companies and accountability, and particularly kind of juxtaposing, utility companies' record profits and executive pay with these struggles of consumers to pay their utility bills. That kind of messaging on executive pay, I'll say, tends to be powerful in a lot of cases. We've certainly seen it with the fossil fuel industry, how persuasive it is to talk about fossil fuel companies' record profits at a time when everyday people are struggling with affordability. Going back a bit further to the 2008 financial crisis, there was a huge outrage over executive pay at the banks that got government bailouts. That was one of the things that spurred the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's really, really powerful when people are struggling to kind of juxtapose that in your message with the pay and the profits of the companies that people are blaming for those struggles. So that's the data that we have. Hopefully that set the stage well. Happy to discuss and answer any questions folks might have later on in the session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. That was really, really insightful, and I really appreciate the work that you all did in compiling a lot of that. Next, we'll pivot to Vicki Kaplan from People's Action Institute, who will be talking about this issue from a national advocacy perspective. So, Vicki, I will let you handle that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Great to see a lot of folks I've gotten to work with and a lot of new folks. And thanks to David and Leah for your great work compiling all this. I was the person who put in the chat, I noticed that some of these were done in January, and given that between then and now, the US has launched two military interventions in oil producing parts of the world, how you might expect that to impact voters' concerns. So I'll put that question out there for when we get back to the Q&A later on. Great. So I'm here to share with you all the work that People's Action Institute has been organizing with folks around the country, and invite you all to be part of that. Forgive my, let's see if I can get rid of there we go. Okay, great. How's that look? Does that look good? Do you see some awesome looking members of Communities United for Action in Cincinnati, Ohio, gathered for their annual membership meeting? Awesome. We are coming together as 75% of people in the United States who pay our utility bills to a Wall Street utility. Sometimes these are known as investor-owned utilities, private utility companies. But the thing that we want to get across that David's polling really demonstrated as well is that these are Wall Street companies that are accountable to their shareholders, okay? And 3/4 of US households, that's who we're paying our bills to. I'm actually not one of those. I live in the city of Glendale, California, which is in Los Angeles County. We have a municipal utility. We deal with some of these same issues, but the focus of United ratepayers is to take on the power of these corporate monopoly utilities. Um, we have been organizing for at least the past 3 years, coming from conversations that we've been having on the doors, knocking on doors in our neighborhoods, in community meetings, in our community organizations, hearing where people are feeling the pain. And we see that reflected, of course, in the polling that's been shared. And we know it from our own lives and experiences that uh, the cost of utilities, and when you add to that the extreme weather that 9 in 10 Americans are experiencing, right? The um, disastrous flooding, the fires that we've had here in Southern California, extreme cold, the deep freezes. So many of us have experienced these directly. And then you add on top of that as well, health impacts, asthma from using gas stoves or living near fossil fuel facilities, cancer, other health impacts. Um, People are not waiting for someone to connect the dots for them. Like people are connecting the dots ourselves, that our costs are going up and we're feeling the burden of that. Um, Health impacts, extreme weather impacts, all of that is connected to the burning of fossil fuels for profit. Um, and people have had enough and they're coming together across the country in many of your organizations, as to join together as ratepayers to take on the entrenched power of these Wall Street utility companies. And you see here, these are some folks in Detroit, Michigan. They're working right now. They're in their last few weeks of gathering ballot signatures to get a ballot measure on the Michigan ballots this fall, to ban DTE and other major corporations in Michigan from uh, spending money to lobby, or excuse me, for political campaigns. Right? Like the utilities shouldn't be able to lobby politicians when they're responsible for appointing the regulators who regulate those utilities. Um, I'll read this out loud to you all, but we always People's Action, I guess I skipped over this. We're a national network of community organizing groups that organize the working class in the United States, to build working class power, to be able to make decisions that impact our lives. We have campaigns focused on energy, climate, and utilities. That's what we're here talking about today, and also housing and healthcare. We know that these are connected. And Donna here is a member of one of our affiliate organizations, Citizen Action New York. And I'll just read this out loud to you all. My name is Donna, and I live with my daughter and 3 grandkids in upstate New York. I had cancer, so I have to go back and forth to Buffalo for treatment. My light bills have been astronomical. I have a lot of medical bills, and I have to choose between the medicine, heat, and light, and buying food every month. So I now have a bill of over $11,000. I just don't have that kind of money. I worked all my life, and I just think that as a retired person, I should at least be able to afford Christmas with my family. It's very unnerving that this is happening. National Grid sent out a contractor, and they did what they claimed was some kind of upgrade, and that's when the bills started to go up to over $500. The National Grid bills are out of sight. Everybody's complaining about them. I'm really afraid for the people because literally people are going to freeze this winter if something's not done. And I want to ask, and please share in the chat, what has been your experience with utility bills this winter? And I learned from my colleague who lives in Phoenix, Arizona. He was thinking about it more as like, what am I expecting this coming summer? But please share what your own experience is in the chat. I think it's really important that we ground all of this work in our own experiences and our shared experiences. And as Donna has done here, she understands that National Grid is the decision maker here. Um, I'm sure you all have been tracking this, but we're in a different political landscape now than when we started the United Ratepayers campaign 3 years ago. There's an election today right? Is the election day today in Arizona? I know it's in Illinois. The Salt River Project in Arizona, where Turning Point USA is getting involved because they see that there's a backlash from working people to the burning of fossil fuels and the raising of utility prices. In the 2025 statewide elections in Georgia, Virginia, and New Jersey, um, utility costs and holding utilities accountable were a top issue for voters. And then in states like Wisconsin, we have candidates for governors, and we'll talk about governors' races in just a few minutes, that are announcing plans to rein in utility rates because they know this is on voters' minds. And thank you, Crystal, appreciate, and Grace, for sharing your stories in the chat as well. Keep those coming as well. Yep. We might get more into this, but right now, February, March, April is Wall Street Utilities earnings season. I know this is all on your calendars and you look forward to it every year, right? Haha. But we should, because this is when we find out how much these Wall Street utility companies made, how much profit they distributed to their shareholders last year in 2025. And as Dave shared with us, when we juxtapose that, it's not just that raw number, but we just juxtapose that with the increase in our bills, and the increase in the number of households who are having their utilities shut off. That's what really bothers people, right? Very disturbed is the quote here, right? Direct quote from a voter. And just from my initial read of some of these earnings reports, I saw some companies increasing their payouts to their shareholders 7%, right? So 7% more between 2024 and 2025. I've got a good job. My salary didn't go up 7%. My utility bill probably went up more than 7%. So why are shareholders, getting more than the increase in inflation when we are not, right? When most Americans are not. Wanted to share a few just highlights from this year so far in Columbus, Ohio. Some great organizations: Columbus Stand Up, Green Workers Alliance, and Communities United for Action gathered, did some great earned media work, delivered 2,500 petitions to the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio to reject AEP's rate increase. And for the first time ever, the City Council of Columbus, Ohio voted, they made a statement against the rate increase. So previously, on the sidelines, actors in society are getting off the sidelines to speak out against these rate increases. There's a moment of political power that we can build outside of the typical regulatory process. And then in Las Vegas, Nevada, they actually just had a victory that hasn't quite really been reported so much about yet, where so the governor is up for re-election this November, and the utility company, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, decided to delay a new rate increase that was supposed to go into effect April 1st. They're delaying that to October, so people won't see their bills until after Election Day. I'm missing any. If you've been sending me time cues, I'm sorry I'm not seeing them. I'll try and wrap it up quickly here. United Ratepayers is open to any power building organization that is organizing a membership of ratepayers. We invite you to join us. We meet monthly. We coordinate campaigns and actions to maximize our power and impact. We build national visibility and identity. And I invite everybody to go right now to unitedratepayers.org. You can do a few things there. If you organize a membership and want to join United Ratepayers, fill out the form that's on the website there. And if you're a supporter, we need your validation. Show your support. You can upload a photo and a quote, and we'll be adding a section of supporters to the website. Also at unitedratepayers.org, you can download a copy of the Blueprint for Affordable Energy. You can also order print copies that we'll mail to you. I just got my box that came today with them. I'm very excited. And this is our report on working people's. So it's actually not a report. It really is a blueprint of working people's solutions for our energy future, and a great complement to Just Solutions library, which we reference in our in our blueprint. And organizers are using this now as they're meeting with legislators to craft bills to introduce in 2027. And that's really how we want this to be used. I think I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions and to the opportunity to work together. Thanks, everyone, so much.
Thanks so much, Vicki. I really appreciate your perspective and also just sharing out the resources that folks can get involved with. Please feel free, folks, to go to unitedratepayers.org. It's a great campaign that's happening all around the country, and so I'm happy to connect when necessary as well. Next, we'll hear from one of our state partners in Oregon, the Oregon Just Transition Alliance, who's been doing some really cool work at the regulatory agencies out there. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Ana Molina.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Give me a second. Okay, can folks see it? Okay.
Perfect.
And I'm gonna turn off my camera only because I know it like lags when I share my screen sometimes, if that's okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Ana Molina, she, her pronouns. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. We're a statewide alliance of communities on the front lines of climate change, economic exploitation, and environmental racism. And so we work with our partners and our members to organize, to create ownership over a future and move Oregon toward an economy that values workers and the environment, and moves us towards a just transition. And we've gotten involved in energy issues way back in 2021 when we launched the um, Oregon Clean Energy Opportunity Campaign. And our goal was to decrease utility costs for struggling families by establishing a low-income rate class. So no one pays more than their fair share on heating and electricity, wanting to create good jobs and renewable energy, um, with strong labor standards and community-based projects, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by achieving 100% renewable energy. Um, in the electric utility sector, and then by creating a fund for healthy homes to support energy efficiency home retrofits for low-income homeowners and renters. And so all of these bills worked together to address the energy burdens and the high energy utility costs that folks were facing from the pandemic, from being at home for long periods of time and not having work. And so this was the policies that we developed at the time and have really like made a launching pad for a lot of like the different issues that we work on today, especially I think in the state of Oregon. And so we were able to pass all of these three bills back in 2021. And I think the HB 2475 has really expanded our utility work around energy affordability for people across Oregon, especially low income BIPOC folks. And so kind of giving some context, back in 2023 and 2024, we had some legislative wins that were more focused on climate resilience and climate investments, like the Healthy Home programs, like by adding more funding into that program, community resilience hubs, and building electrification. But around that same time that we were working on those policies in 2023 and 2024, in 2024, there were 4,700 households who were shot off in April because of non-payment. And we had an ice storm in January 2024. and people were already facing high bills. And so the ice storm that happened in that January only exacerbated all of these issues, along with PG&E rate increase and a lot of different utility rate increases that were happening. Customers were saying that they could not afford their bills. We were hearing this from our members, and their community members. And so too many people, like Victoria had shared, so many people had to choose between food, medicine, and heat. And so that is really unfair. And so thousands of families have now seen unaffordable bills lead to disconnections from utility service as well. So we were hearing this in 2024. And so in 2025, we worked with a broader coalition of partners. We worked with our local Citizens Utility Board, CUB here in Oregon, with our members, and the different partners to move forward the Fair Energy Act, which stands for Fairness and Affordability and Residential Energy Act. So this requires the Public Utility Commission to do a cumulative impact analysis for residential rate increases, and it spreads out utility rate increase requests to every 3 years by 2027. So it moves us into a multi-year rate making, whereas we were seeing rate increases, utilities asking for rate increases every year, which was really hard on advocates and on working families. And so we wanted to include that. And then it prohibits increases during the winter months. So that's between November through March, where we see the highest utility rates happen. And then we had also asked for a one-time 18-month stay out from where rate increases are prohibited for 18 months until multi-year rate making is established, and also requires transparency by requiring utilities to report on their biggest cost drivers. So trying to create some transparency between the utilities and customers. And along with the Fair Energy Act, that one was our main priority. We also saw we supported a lot of other policies like the Power Act, which was to ensure that large load users like data centers pay their fair share of utility costs. So it's not just you customers that are bearing the brunt of it, but that we see everybody paying their fair share. Because of the high energy bills that people were facing and not a lot of support, we also supported to expand to expand the Oregon Energy Assistance Program. So it increased the low income ratepayer assistance statewide from 20 million to 40 million, which would be a huge relief to many Oregon families. There was also a bill called the Grid Enhancing Technologies, which would require modernization of capacity and efficiency of existing power lines as a more cost-effective alternative to building new ones. And then there was also the performance-based regulation, so requiring the PUC to incentivize utilities to meet Oregon's climate goals, which include net zero emissions by 2050 and efficient use of money. So in 2025, it was a really big win for a lot of energy policies, especially ones that were related to the Public Utility Commission, and all of them working in tandem to really um, look at the costs and reducing costs for customers across the state, especially for the investor-owned utility customers. And so right now we're currently in the implementation process. One of the bills, like I said, from 2021 has really expanded energy affordability and has opened up this docket in our PUC, in the Oregon PUC, which is the Disconnection and Consumer Protections, which is UM 2211. And so this docket has really looked at the Energy Affordability Act, has really looked at how utilities are making sure that they're implementing energy affordability. It's been an ongoing docket since 2021. And that's where OJTA and a variety of partners have engaged in a lot. One of our most recent wins was a permanent disconnection protection for extreme weather, especially in light of like the federal losses of SNAP and federal aid. And it's not associated with extreme weather and climate, but all that is needed is a self-attestation of economic hardship that people can share with their utility in order to be able to not be disconnected. So it's just a temporary one. And it ended on March 1st. And then we're still currently right now, other issues within this docket that we've looked at are currently addressing privacy of utility consumer data from ICE and exploring rulemaking for future legislation. Some of the lessons learned is that the metrics of equity needed in the amount of disconnections and the rearages decreases are still something to move forward in this docket as well. And so with the implementation as well, for the Fair Energy Act, there's currently four dockets, which is a really big scope of work for many of us. So there's four dockets, and they're going to be looking, and they're all happening around like ta in tandem. So there's a docket that is the investigation. So this is just like the general one where everybody's like submitting feedback. There's a docket to really look at the multi-year uh, rate plan and performance-based rate making, looking at them together and seeing how they work together. There's the general rate provision and the scheduling. So we had asked for a schedule, and so this is looking at when utilities would come in for their rate increases and creating a schedule for them. And then also the docket that's looking at the winter rate moratorium and reporting requirements of like what the utilities are reporting on, especially with the transparency that we were looking at. I think some of the lessons that we've learned in this rate making is that utilities fighting for a 4-year timeline or multi-year rate planning want to rely on alternative rate making mechanisms and a single issue rate making to get around rate schedules. So it's been pretty hard. Right now, there's also currently the performance-based rate making that's been happening, and while getting involved in a rate case as well with the Cascade Natural rate case. And then we also still do a lot of advocacy. And so we have a couple programs and new issues still arise on top of like the ones that we're currently working on. We have our Energy Justice Community Leaders Program. So this focuses on educating community members and the impacts that they have and supporting them through civic engagement. So it's a community program that supports community members to engage at the Public Utility Commission. So really ground truthing a lot of like the issues. And so a lot of them are giving testimony at the Public Utility Commission, a lot of them sometimes in Spanish. Um, and then our members as well, were looking at different issues. And so one of our members in Eugene are working to pass the Eugene Clean Energy Fund. And this is in tandem with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute. So the Eugene Clean Energy Fund will take 2% of profits of the largest businesses operating in Eugene and create a fund for local climate justice projects. Whereas the Clean Energy Leadership Institute is the portion where we're helping train community leaders to engage. And then again, this last year we saw another nuclear bill wanting to pass, a nuclear study bill, and then obviously more data centers. And so we're hearing from both our alliance and community members that their community is really concerned about the impacts to their communities around these issues. So those are some of the things that we've worked on. Um, and the campaigns that we've worked on and how we've seen the legislation that we've passed have an impact at the PUC and how we've been working on different issues in the PUC and working on the implementation. Again, policy is only as good as it's being implemented. And so that's why we're engaging in there and also trying to build up the leadership of community to engage in this as well. So thank you. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna, and great work. Y'all have accomplished so much in Oregon. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A tab, but we'll also have a Q&A after our next presenter who will be presenting shortly about some different utility decision venues and things of that nature. So, Elena, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone. And I just put a link in a chat to our Energy Affordability Policy Library, which many of you have attended our previous webinars and are familiar with. I was going to briefly run through a few utility reform policies that could give examples of ways to improve utility accountability, rein in costs, and ensure that we're advancing an equitable and clean energy transition in an affordable way. And Anna, everything you're doing in Oregon basically is that list. So go and check out the library over here. I'll skip through it for now because I want to get to questions. But if you search under the affordability strategy, you can look at utility reform policies and see some examples on data center cost containment. I think we have Oregon's ways to limit lobbying costs, and other strategies for ensuring utility accountability and affordability. So what I want to talk about a little bit right now is where utility accountability decisions actually occur. I think somebody in the Q&A or in the chat said, like, do you have anything to actually break down um, how to navigate utilities? And unfortunately, it is really, really complicated. And it depends a lot on where you are and what your utility structure looks like, in terms of where the leverage points are. So if we can switch to the next slide. This sort of replicates something that Vicki said earlier. But one of the first questions is, what is your utility ownership? This is for electric utilities, not for gas. But it shows that you have a small number, but a huge number of customers who belong to investor-owned utilities. So again, these are ones who are getting their money from shareholders for investments. They are typically regulated by public utility commissions, and they receive a quote unquote regulated rate of return on those investments. Sometimes there's a little bit of a mix. I live in Oakland, California, where we have an investor-owned utility called Pacific Gas and Electric. It has some of the highest rates in the country, but we actually also have a local community choice aggregator where the sort of local government has come together and set up this, I think it's called Ava Clean Energy, that actually procures our electricity at a cleaner and lower rate than the utility at large. So occasionally there can be a few different decision-making levels. The second category here are rural cooperatives. These tend to be nonprofit with elected oversight from the cooperative members. They cover a huge area. So there's a lot of them. They tend to be smaller than the investor-owned utilities in terms of number of people, but because they cover so much area, they also have a huge percentage of the actual like poles and infrastructure that we see across the country. Um, they tend to have more coal. They cover a lot of low-income counties. And one of the challenges here then is that because they don't have, honestly, shareholder funds for investment, because they're nonprofit, they historically haven't been able to get tax credits, although that got changed in their IRA. And because they have a large low income base, it can hard to do ratepayer funded programs for things. So a lot of the rural co-ops are short on funding for a lot of the sort of clean energy programs and low income efficiency programs and other things that we may be interested in. Under the Empowering Rural America program under the IRA, which still seems to be happening, there's about $10 billion though, that is supporting rural co-ops for things like retiring coal plants and getting rid of some of those costs. And then we have municipal utilities. These are publicly owned. I think, Vicki, you said you live in a municipal utility in Glendale. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has over 1 million people. A lot of these are also tiny little city-led municipal utilities that can either be run by local government, they might be elected, have elected oversight, or maybe appointed, let's say, by the mayor. So those are the types of utilities, and so you're going to have different kinds of oversight and honestly different kinds of costs depending on that type. And then next slide. The next quick thing I'm going to just briefly go over has to do with utility structure. There's a subset of utilities that own all of their power plants and generation and the transmission and distribution. And then there's a set of deregulated states where that electricity is purchased on a wholesale market. Both of those have trade-offs. And in the case of wholesale markets, you also often have what are called independent system operators or grid operators that manage those markets, and where there also may be opportunities for intervention. Finally, in some places that we also have what's called retail choice, where people can actually select their own electricity or gas provider. Theoretically, that sounds good. There should be more competition. In reality, a lot of these tend to be predatory, and people get locked into contracts and rates that they weren't necessarily expecting. Next slide. And then we get to decision makers. We've talked a decent amount about utility commissions or boards that are overseeing or regulating utilities. They oversee things like long-term planning. What kind of resources do we actually need on the grid in the first place to meet future demand? They do general rate cases. So these are determining what utilities are allowed to spend money on in the first place, and then how that is allocated among customers to actually pay for it. They often oversee things like low income programs or energy efficiency programs, and a whole slew of other utility processes. Technically, utility commissions can do a lot. The reality is, a lot of times they don't do it, or they claim that their jurisdiction doesn't enable them to do it until they're forced to do so by the legislature. So you often require a law to be passed of some kind to say, actually, you do need to make a special rate class for data centers and make sure that they're paying their fair share. You do need to set a target for renewables or require a low income program, um, or to, let's say, ensure that utilities aren't allowed to uh, put ratepayer money into their lobbying costs, right? Which is what Vicki was talking about for DTE. And so legislatures will often pass laws that end up forcing utility commissions to take into consideration different kinds of utility reforms. Governors have some more limited opportunity for over utility oversight. What we've seen a couple of interesting cases of lately include, let's say, an executive order from the new governor of New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, who just asked utilities to freeze rates and um, to consider new options for interconnecting clean energy and think about things like virtual power plants. Often what this does is end up sort of catalyzing conversations. It's not set in law, but can certainly move things forward. And they also are often responsible for appointing utility commissioners in some places. Other places they're elected. And then there can be, again, some options for local government, particularly when we're talking about municipal utilities. And then the federal government also, in particular, oversees things like those regional grid operators and transmission that we were talking about before. I'm going to leave it there so we have, yeah, Crystal wrote something about this is simplified framing. This is all a simplified framing. Um, this is all wildly complicated. And again, it tends to depend on the specific requirements of your state and your specific utility. So I'm going to wrap it up there, though, so that we have some time for questions and breakouts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elena. Really appreciate that just breakdown. And again, if there are tools or resources to demystify the PUC process or utility process in general, we will definitely do some research and make sure to provide those in the follow-up email that we'll send some folks, send you all after the webinar today. But I'm going to jump to Q&A, and we've had some pretty robust conversations slash questions answered in the chat already, so I won't reiterate those. But one question that we see is for Anna specifically, and that says, "Thank you for sharing your work. I know it continues, but wondering what were some effective tactics in just passing the Fair Energy Act and winning oversight at the PUC?"
Yeah, I think one of the things that really helped, I think, was in 2024. There, I feel like there was always like momentum and just like things that happened externally. There was the freeze that happened in the beginning of the year. Multiple investor-owned utilities were coming in for rate increases around the same time. There was a lot of constituents who were calling their legislators about having really high energy bills. And so at the end of that session, there was just this like appetite for people to be really engaged and like they were really angry about having such high energy bills. And so our members, our JTA, also external partners like the Citizens Utility Board, Community Energy Project, a lot of different folks came together of like, okay, what are some ways to address Um, the fact that like rate increases are happening every year, people are really angry. And so we worked closely with CUB to help develop this policy, and then we had a really strong legislative champion. I think one of the things that really worked in our favor at the time when we were passing the Fair Energy Act is that we looked at it as a consumer issue and not an energy and climate issue. So we were able to keep it away at the time from our environment and climate committee at the state legislature and move it into the consumer like Justice Committee at the state legislature and like keeping it to like, hey, this is like people are paying too much and trying to keep it out of like the climate narrative because it wasn't like faring very well in the state legislature at the time. And so I think having that tactic and really focusing it on people, keeping it out of that committee helped us move it forward and having a really strong legislator who moved it forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. That sounds exactly like some framing that I know a lot of folks are using around energy issues currently as it relates to consumer protection. So good to know. Another question we have in the chat, I think this is mostly for Elena. Would you suggest there be model bills for some of these topics? Are there model bills? Particularly interested in something like Oregon's permanent disconnection protections in extreme weather. I hear there are some tools that Just Solutions has put out that has some ideas around model bills, Elena, so feel free to share those.
Yeah, I will put the link to our utility shutoff policy in the chat. That doesn't go into actual model language. That just goes into some of the sort of key requirements that you might want in a bill. But I will link to that so everyone can see it.
Thank you. Um, cool. We had one question related to polling. So David, are there examples of where polling has directly shaped a campaign or policy outcome in a space that you can point to?
Yeah, I mean, there was a ton. We're tending to see like the most polling by advocacy groups around like big legislative pushes. So I think like the last like really big one where we saw like a ton of polling that helped to inform national messaging and things like that was the Inflation Reduction Act. There have definitely been examples um at the state level where, I think like strategic polling by tr kind of trusted in-state groups released like in advance of a legislative session has helped to kind of like basically give cover to legislators. Like I know like in Michigan, for example, before they set new clean electricity standards a few years ago, there were like a ton of polls that came out basically saying like Michigan voters want this and don't want to drop from the agenda. And so I think like in those examples, like I don't know if the poem is like decisive, but it helps like give a little bit of a nudge and just like give legislators cover. I would say you're much more likely to have a successful outcome there in a state that like doesn't get polled a lot because legislators there are just like so eager for data on their constituents. So yeah, I've seen a few at the state level. Obviously the federal level is very difficult.
Thanks, David.